Hello, everybody. Hey, welcome out. Welcome out to this episode here of the podcast. Here, we plan to do this here on a regular basis. This is number 8 that we're doing. But yeah, this is going to be the Tax Sale Titans podcast. This is something that we want to do on a regular basis, so we have a chance to cover properties that are coming up, good deals that we find, good tax sale auctions. Things that we think are interesting and worth selling or worth showing everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. In each one of these, we want to be able to talk about a tax sale topic or training topic, go over how that works, go look at upcoming auctions, review some past deals, and then also look at some deals where mistakes were made. That's the one thing about tax sale investing. There's a lot of money to be made, but you can also make mistakes if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, in fact, the more involved you get, the more likely you are to see mistakes, or you can make mistakes yourself. But also, I mean, as you participate in auctions, you'll see mistakes made on a regular basis, just because, in fact, auctions are probably the most interesting for that because you know exactly what each property is. So as you see what other people are willing to pay for it, you kind of get an idea of how much they know or don't know based on what they're willing to pay. It becomes very apparent, as you watch bidding happen. Yeah, we want to talk about that. We want to be able to show, bad examples and good examples, because they both exist out there. And so we're going to show you a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. Before we get started, we're going to go ahead and go over any news of announcements. If any of you guys are interested in coming out and attending one of our live 3 days, we have events coming up in LA area, Orange County, Dallas, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona. So if you're interested, definitely let us know. Also, for all of the attendees on today's call, you can go ahead and sign up for a free strategy session. In fact, Shade's going to go ahead and give you the link in the chat section so that when you do want to register for that, you can go ahead and get registered, and we'll give you a call, find out what you're doing, and help you get started.
Actually, I don't have that copied yet here. Should I go over there and grab it here real quick?
Um, yeah, whenever you get a chance, we can do it whenever we need to.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Here, we'll do it in a minute. Remind me in a minute. Then when we jump off slides, to add that to the chat section here. I'll add that link into the chat section so you can click on that for the strategy call there, for everyone that would like to do that. Also, if you have questions, we love to take questions, and oftentimes the questions will drive better conversations and will lead us into different directions. We end up covering a lot of good content. So feel free to ask questions throughout the training. We're always happy to take those. You can ask those in the chat, and we will we'll try to cover those before the end of the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, we're going to have a time at the very end where we answer any of your questions. So if it's on the topic, we can go ahead and answer it then. And as we're going through the slides, if they're not necessarily what we're talking about, we'll address all of those questions at the very end.
Yeah, we also want to congratulate members, when they do well. And Sandeep just did an awesome job. They won 4 properties in one auction, which they did really well with these. And the 4 properties they picked up are 4 nice homes. Really the homes are in pretty good shape. They did a pretty good job. They got photos of all of them. And they ended up picking up these 4 properties for just a tiny percentage of value. We think they're going to do really well on these properties. And yeah, it's just it's great to see somebody succeed here, in that with the auctions, because we know a lot of students, it is lousy to lose properties at auction, which happens a lot, but you never know when you're going to hit a home run or multiple home runs here in a single auction and do really well.
Yeah, exactly. We definitely want to congratulate. I mean, these were purchased this week by one of our coaching students, and so we got 4 homes valued at over 230 grand for probably around 15% of the property's value. Now, these are kind of what we consider starter homes, but these could be great rentals. They could be turn around in what we call a wholesale deal where we're selling it as is to another investor, or you could go ahead and fix the properties up and then sell them for full market. So a lot of possibility. We're really excited about them. Congratulations again.
Yeah, they really are. They are impressive properties, and great to see the wins. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about here a little bit, the training topic we're going to be talking about is how we set our max bids. And this is actually, it's one of the most important things that you do as a tax sale investor. It's how much you're willing to pay for properties. This is one of the places where we see a lot of people make mistakes. In fact, it's very common for people that are unaware of how tax sales really work to come in and to automatically overpay, because all they really are familiar with is traditional real estate investing. And this is not traditional real estate. We're coming in from the perspective as wholesalers, essentially. That's what the county is doing for us. They're selling it to us, with clouded titles, essentially, so that they can sell the properties off and not have any responsibility necessarily with the properties. But for us, though, what it means is that we are wholesalers. We don't want to pay anywhere close to market value. In fact, we're the ones who should be paying the lowest price on the property, because we have to take the property and clear the title for it. We're the one taking it directly from the county and their foreclosure into the sales market. And so we need to make sure that we're picking it up for a good low percentage of value, so that number one, we can get the property sold, but also so that it's easier to sell. And ideally, when we sell it, the person that we sell it to could also be an investor, and they can also make money on it. That's essentially why we need to be able to pick it up for wholesale pricing, is because if who we're going to sell it to is most likely going to be an investor as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we have really three different steps that we teach our students. And for those members on the line, you know this. We have stage 1 due diligence that has 6 steps, and we really call that basic property research. If it passes stage 1 due diligence, then we may move on to stage 2 due diligence, which has another 6 steps. And that's about really researching the title and the deed, looking for those things like those government issued liens. And then stage 3 due diligence has 3 steps as well. And with this, what we're going to be focusing on today is how do we set our max bids. So this is one of the steps in stage 3 research that we're going to be talking about and covering today.
Yeah, I mean, the idea between the stages is that you obviously don't want to sink a lot of time. I mean, your time is your most valuable resource, and you don't want to sink a lot of time into every property. You only want to sink time into properties if they have the potential to work. And the only way you're going to know that is by conducting certain research on them. And so what we do is we have our research set up in stages so that we can ensure that properties justify the research that we're going to put into them. So with stage 1, this is where we're figuring out if the numbers are going to work or not. It's all the surface level stuff, but it's the important stuff that makes for the numbers of the deal. But in stage 2 due diligence, it's really about trying to find potential risks that are associated with the property. It's things that are attached to the title. And so it's title research that we're doing. But stage 3 is really where it all kind of comes together. This is where we take what we've been able to figure out here about the property. This is also where we would take something like an on-site evaluation, so photos of the property, looking at the condition, and we would, between those, figure out what our max bid should be based on the value. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how we come up with those max bids and where the percentages should be on properties, whether you're investing into land or homes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we see on our Facebook post or on our YouTube videos all the time about how high should I go on bidding on a property. This is kind of what we're going to be talking about today, is determining our bid amount based on what type of property we're bidding on. It obviously makes less sense to spend a lot of money on a $10,000 lot, paying 50% of value, pay $5,000 for a $10,000 lot, when we're talking about a piece of land that's still a tax deed foreclosure. And so what we're going to do is go over those guidelines and show you how much we're willing to pay for the different types of properties that we come across, whether that be land property or something like a structured property. We have a system in place where we set our max bid based on the property value, and then also based on the condition when we're talking about homes and structured property.
Yeah, we separate the two because I guess we have different percentages for different types of properties. A little bit different for land and improved properties, but there are a lot of reasons why this is important, and I think we'll probably get into them a little bit here as we talk about each one of them. With land, though, the way that this system works here, we're going to start off with the lowest price and kind of work our way up. And we do that because, again, we want everyone to kind of understand the percentages that we're going to be working at and where we'll start at with a lot of properties. So if land is valued at less than $10,000 or up to $10,000, we're generally trying to get that property for close to 10 cents on the dollar. 5 to 15 cents is what we could say here. But really we're trying to get it 5 cents, maybe 10 cents on the dollar is what we're going to be looking at, and is really what makes for a better deal. This property in the example is a good example of it. property costs $340, is valued at about $8,000. That's a good example of a wholesale deal and a property, that is picked up for about 5% or under 5% of its value.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing we probably should clarify when we talk about wholesale value, when we talk about wholesale value, the terminology of what that means has changed since me and Shade first got started. When we talk about wholesale back when we first got started, it was about buying a property for cheap, turning around and selling it for cheap, but still making a good potential profit. So buy a property for $1,000 that's worth 12 grand, sell it for 6 grand, keep that difference. Now the word wholesale means for a lot of people doing what's called paper flips, getting contracts and then reselling that property. And so when we talk about wholesale, what we're really talking about is buying a tax deed and then selling it to another investor or to another buyer at a discount where we haven't gone through the process of quieting the title. So we haven't gone through the legal process. We haven't spent the money. If we're looking at a $10,000 lot, it doesn't make sense for us as the buyer and then again the seller to go ahead and spend a couple of grand to go through quiet title. It makes more sense for us to sell that to somebody who wants to hold on to the property, maybe as an investment, or maybe to eventually build on it. And then if they want to go through quiet title, they can after they purchased it. But we are essentially giving it to them for a discount because we're selling it as is.
Yeah, I mean, the real value in picking the property up there for a low percentage of value comes in our ability to sell it for a low percentage of value as well. So if you've only paid 5% for the property, I mean, at $340, what you can sell the property for is pretty much, up to you. But it wouldn't be hard to get a sell here in this deal. I mean, obviously anything over $500, would be profitable for you. It's just a matter of how profitable you want to be. And so, you can set prices at a lot of different points here. But if we were to sell this property, in order to find a buyer, sometimes we have to discount the price and attract buyers by offering them a good deal, the opportunity to make money. In which case we might sell the property for 50% of what it's worth, or sometimes maybe even less. It all depends on how quickly we want to get a deal done and how much money we're leaving on the table versus how quickly we can make that transaction work. So let's look at another example here, just so we can see how this starts to build and change. Because as the value goes up, so does the percentage of value that we're willing to pay. But again, we're going to keep that towards the lower end of the spectrum whenever we can. So properties valued between 10 and 20,000, we can pay between 10 and 20% of value. But we're always going to try to lean towards the lower end of that, if possible. If I can get a $20,000 property at 10% of value, then I'm that much better off, because again, I've paid a low percentage of value. It leaves me with, quite a bit more there when it comes to my ability to sell the property and to offer it for a low price. If I paid, if I paid a high percentage for it, or if I paid, let's say, 25% for this property, I'm going to have to turn around and sell it for at least, a much higher amount than I would if I paid a lower amount. Basically, it just makes it easier to sell, when it's a lower price. Common sense.
Yeah, exactly. And at that $10,000 price point, we're going to be at that 10%, being kind of the max amount. But as we get up to closer to 20, then maybe we're willing to pay 15 cents on the dollar. And for the right property that maybe is going up in value, maybe would pay 20 cents, but really we're trying to keep it for under 15 cents on the dollar in this particular class. And we can see here from the property example, this is a property that sold for $1,350, was worth about 15 grand. This is a property you could turn around and flip very easy. Would probably take this property and would sell it wholesale as is. But we're getting into the territory where if it's cheap enough, we could look at doing something like quiet title. We also, if we had the right buyer, maybe we use something like tax title services where we can offer title insurance on it, even though it's a tax deed property. And so when we're looking at this category, we're usually doing wholesale, but we may start looking at doing some legal action if the property deal makes sense.
It's also worth mentioning that it's deals like these ones right here that are the way that a lot of students have kind of built up their capital, or build up some of their working capital. It's with deals like these. So they're picking up these properties, turning around and selling these to increase their working capital that they have. And these deals are pretty straightforward. They're not overly expensive. You see, this one costs $1,300, which is not bad at all for a $15,000 piece of property. But it's a good example of another piece of land. Let's see, as they go up in value though, so $20,000 to $50,000 range in value, we're going to be between 10 and up to 30%, of value on. So our percentage increases up to about 30% if the value is there, on the higher end of that. But again, we're going to try for the lower, or we're going to try for the lower percentage if we can. So if a property is valued at 50,000, we could pay up to 30% on it, but we're generally going to try to get it for as low as we can.
Yeah, exactly. And as we get into this price point, this is where we're probably going to take the property through quiet title. Now, any of these we can still wholesale. We can still sell them as is. In fact, we may have an investor come up to us and want to be able to buy that property. We had one of our students, coaching students years ago, that ended up purchasing a property off of the county, and then somebody contacted him the next day seeing that the property had been purchased and offered him, additional $50,000 more than what they paid for the property. So even though he maybe was planning on going through quiet title on this piece of land, it made more sense to quickly flip it, make some good profit, and then put that money back into new investments. So in looking at this property, we can see it got picked up for $6,700, was valued about $30,000. So in this case, the buyer could either wholesale the property, or they could go ahead and go through quiet title. Maybe it cost them a couple of grand. They're into it, maybe less than 10 grand. They sell it for 30, they can make $20,000 on the deal.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of options as well when you're at that. If you wanted to wholesale the property, you could probably list it there at a lower price. Let's say you list it wholesale for 20,000. You could still be, it could still be a good profitable deal if you can find a buyer at that price, which you may be able to do. Now, that may not be a problem. But by paying a good low percentage of value, though, you make it possible. When you pay a high percentage of value, it just limits the number of buyers you can potentially sell to. As we get up to the properties class 4, so this would be pieces of land valued between 50 to 100,000, our percentage jumps up to 40%, that we could pay as a maximum bid. So properties valued at 100,000, we could pay upwards of 40,000, but obviously we're trying to get it for less if we can. But the numbers would justify that amount just based on values and based on our potential profitability. So this property in the example is actually a good one, because it is, you can see it's a piece of acreage. I don't know how many acres, maybe 5 to 10 acres. It was acquired, it's valued at 100,000, acquired for 27,000. So they ended up paying about 27% for it. But it has pretty good profitability here in it, because there's about $70,000 potential profit in that price point.
Yeah, exactly. So this type of property, it makes sense to go ahead and spend the extra couple of grand to go through quiet title. Maybe, after all, everything's been said and done, we put 30 grand into it, but we have $70,000 worth of potential profit there. And one thing to consider is when we're selling things as is, these need to be cash buyers. So they need to have the money up front to be able to pay us so that we can transfer the property into their name. When we get these more expensive properties, the reason it makes sense to go through the quiet title process is because somebody can get title insurance, which means that they can get a loan on the property. And so, that's one of the big advantages of taking a tax deed through quiet title and receiving a warranty deed, which we talk about more in other videos, is because obviously you have the ability to sell it using having quiet title done, where you get the warranty deed, where you can go ahead and sell it for full market value.
Yeah. By the way, I can see some of your guys' questions coming in, so that is excellent. We will cover those here in a bit, but yeah, I do see those coming in. So thank you for that. We'll cover those here in a few. All right, and yeah, let's see, as property values go up, numbers continue to make sense. Over 100,000, the number jumps up to 50% of value. Because again, there's more potential profitability there. The numbers can work if we're going to pay up to that amount. And this example is a good one to show those numbers. So we have a property here that's valued at about 120,000 that was acquired for 46,000, which leaves a potential profit there of about $70,000. Roughly, give or take some. But this is a great example of the kind of property, because this is probably one that we would take through quiet title, to sell for full market, just because there's no reason to leave that much money on the table. And property acreage like this also shouldn't be too hard to sell, especially when you've paid a lower percentage of value like this, so you have flexibility on your prices. A lot of people that own land don't really have all that much flexibility on their pricing because they may have paid full price for the property. So we're in that unique position of paying low percentages of value, enabling us to sell it for a lot less than anybody else can.
Yeah, in fact, I think that more money can be made in class 3 through 5 of land than even in structured properties, homes, things like that, because we don't have to worry about the rehab component. We don't have to worry about the cost that is involved in rehab, and land is what it is. So if we have a good piece of land and we pick it up for cheap enough, the most expensive or our biggest cost may be going through quiet title. I guess we could have a survey done and a perk test and a couple of those type of things if we really wanted to, but our cost is minimal and our profit margins are high. So even if they put, if they were into a total of 50,000, bought it for 46, spent an extra 3 or 4 grand quieting the title, maybe having a survey done, something like that, and then it's valued at 120. Even if they sold it for 100,000, they're still making, $50,000 profit on that deal and can put that money into more deals. And so, we really love higher valued land. We think there's a huge opportunity in purchasing these type of properties in the tax sale.
Well, and the one thing that you don't get with higher, with land like this is you don't get improvement costs. You don't get, misevaluations on what's wrong with the property. You don't get missed, you don't miss things with the condition that can cost you a lot of money. The things that can cost you money are generally things that are just going to increase your profitability, like like going through quiet title action there, or getting surveys done on the property, or simple things like that. With land, tend to make the property more profitable. It's different than the way that it is with improved properties, where uh, if you get the wrong idea about the condition of a property and you pay too much for it, you could find yourself literally in a situation where it's hard to get rid of, where it's hard to find a buyer at the price point that you're at. And that's why land really is a bigger risk for investors than, homes are a bigger risk to investors than land any day, just because of that potential for repair. And because we're trying to base the condition of the property on what we can see, and hopefully off of current images. But if not current images, it's really easy to make that mistake as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of how we look at land. Even that 50 cents on the dollar, that would really have to be the prime piece of land that's in an area that's really going up in value, or is really a hot market. Otherwise, we're usually going to be trying to get it for under 30 cents on the dollar, 35 cents on the dollar for the top properties. But there is a lot of potential. Next, we're going to talk about structured properties. And when we're talking about structured properties, this can include homes, condominiums, commercial properties, anything that essentially has a structure on it. But it's so important when we're looking at structured properties to evaluate the condition. The condition is going to be so important in setting our max bid amount.
Yeah, it's especially important with tax sale properties, because usually when we're looking at tax sale properties, we're looking at them following the end of a redemption period. Okay, so in whatever state they happen to be in, they could have a redemption period ranges from 2 years to 3 years, 4 years. But with these tax sale properties specifically, um, they don't get foreclosed on until they've had all of that time period, delinquent taxes basically, and waited out. In other words, the county can't take action on the property until the redemption period has passed. So with a lot of the land, it's possible that, some of these properties there, that somebody could have passed away. If the property is vacant now, you have to wonder how long has it been vacant, because it could have been vacant for a very long time. And so when Steve says the condition, is key, it's very important. It's crucial, because the condition is the difference between a property that may be usable versus a property that just needs to be torn down, and it essentially is a money pit. The only way we're going to know the difference between those two is through images that we get of the property and other details that we can learn about them through our research. And so, yeah, online evaluations or on-site evaluations are they are a must for improved properties. And it's because we can't usually trust the online information. Now, in some cases, counties will actually provide images of the property, and sometimes they'll even provide interior images of the property. That's great. When we can get images from the county that are current, like if they're taking images of the property for the sale, then that is the best situation you can get, because they can show you images and have access to the property that you couldn't get on your own. In other words, if you were just on your own, you'd be lucky to get images of the outside of the property from a few different angles here, but you're not gonna be able to get all of that. So nothing is better than having the images directly from the county. But if we don't have that, then we can't trust most online sources, even if they don't appear to be that old. So 2 years might not seem like like that long of a time period, but it's a long time when a property is sitting vacant, and it's a long time for things to go wrong. So whatever the time period is here, we need to get images of the property that allow us to see what it looks like right now, so that we can determine what that condition is like, and how much work we think the property is going to need, because that's how we're going to determine our max bid.
Yeah, in fact, we were doing a webinar a couple of weeks ago with our membership, and we were going over and looking at that exact thing. We were looking at properties where we looked at the online evaluation or the online photos from, say, something like Google Maps. And within a year, of that time, then we were looking at photos that were current photos. And over that year period of time, we saw all kinds of issues on the property. We went from a property that was being lived in to a property that was partially boarded up, windows were open, roof was damaged, weeds were out of control. And so in those different types of examples, we can never trust the online information. We've always got to do that on-site evaluation to make sure that what we're buying, is in condition that it can be repaired. You don't know how many times that we've attended an auction and seen two people there local. These are local people, mind you, that are bidding against each other on a property that we drove by, and we know that that property has been burnt down. And all they're doing is they're trusting the online information. They didn't go out there and view the property, and they're bidding against each other, thinking that each one of them had done the due diligence. So that's part of the reason why it's so important.
It's also really important, especially at the lower price point. So the lower the value of the improved property, the bigger the risk it is for an investor. What that means is that the first couple of classes that we have here, class 1, class 2 properties, they are they're properties that are probably, or in many cases, properties we might avoid. Unless we can determine the condition on them is really good, we're going to avoid them, because there's the potential here for things to go wrong, and for these properties to actually need more work than what they're even worth. And so that's one of the reasons why we have to be very careful with these, is because it's easy for them to be money pits, when they don't have a lot of value. And that's because it's very simple for something like a roof repair, which can cost X amount regardless of how much the property's worth. And let's say you've got a roof repair that's going to cost $10,000 to $12,000 regardless of property value. If the property's only valued at $30,000, that's an issue, because again, you're sinking a lot of money into a property that's probably not going to ever really be worth much more than that 30,000. They have a value limited property, and that's what we've got to look out for. So class 1 properties, those valued between $10,000 and $30,000, we're going to be paying about 10 to 15% of value on. Most of these are probably going to be mobile homes with land. If they're not, there could be homes, in this price range. If you could get a condo in this range, it would be awesome. Condos, are always good opportunities here. But yeah, lower valued homes. This is a good example with this mobile home at $2,600. It's about the right price point here, where you're not into it too deep. You can get out of it very easily. At that price point, you could turn around at $5,000 and double your money. So that's a good price point to be at with this property, just because you can wholesale it relatively easy. And if you need to put some money into it, you could put in some, because you're at a low enough price point. You could at least, you may need to do things like get the property more presentable or easier to sell. And that may include stuff like, getting landscaping work done, getting garbage hauled off. It can mean some different things like that, where you may have some expenses, but you want to limit your expenses here with a deal like this, just because there's not a lot of money you can really sink into it.
Yeah, in fact, Shade brings up a real good point. The only type, excuse me, the only type of properties that we really target in this range are going to be mobile homes on their own piece of land, or maybe a mobile home on a mobile home lot that we talk about in one of our videos. But in this particular situation, it's really going to be the example like this. In fact, we picked up a mobile home a couple of months ago at an auction that we paid $2,000 for, and it was very similar to this property. If we can get that, then we've got a mobile home lot, which means that we have power, water, sewer, all of those kind of hookups already on the lot, which really means it's an improved lot. And then with the mobile home, like like Shade said, we can either wholesale that, we can fix the property up and use it as a rental, but that's really the only category. Usually with a $30,000 home, we're going to avoid it unless somehow we can see that it's in great condition, because there's just not enough profit in there. If you were to go in a home and you have to replace the roof or do something like that, that could be $10,000 that could wipe out any profit.
Yeah, the real value in these properties is in the improved lot itself. In having the lot with all the hookups there, the improvements for the mobile home. And so if you have a mobile home on there that is usable, then that's great. But the property itself has pretty good value, just alone, because people know they can bring in. There's lots of people that are looking for for their own piece of land that they can put their trailer on, so they don't have to pay lot fees, and so they can make it semi-permanent basically. So yeah, let's see what happens here as values go up here on properties. So $30,000 to $60,000 range, our percentage of value we can pay jumps up to about 25%. And this also expands, the range of properties, but in a lot of ways, though, we're still looking at some of the same types of properties. Though we could still be looking at mobile homes with land. They might just be a little bit nicer. This is also where we're going to start to see condos, and other homes, for sale here. You could find commercial stuff in this price range as well that could be, a pretty good opportunity. In fact, it's like this property here, that was picked up. It was picked up for
Yeah, for 23 grand. It was valued at over 50 grand. But this is actually one of the properties that was picked up by one of our students, one of our coaching members. They ended up picking up for 23,000, and then they actually sold it as is to somebody who ended up paying 50,000. They made $27,000 profit and were able to do it pretty quickly. So this is kind of what we'll do with a lot of these different type of properties. We may go ahead and do what we call lipstick rehab, which is just, fixing it so that it's good enough to either turn around and sell or to rent out. We're not going to be putting marble countertops in a property like this, but we're going to go ahead and paint, carpet, and then turn around and sell it, or doing something like this student did where she just found a buyer. Maybe the property was worth 60 grand. She sold it to him for a discount and then was able to take that additional profit, put that back into more property.
Yeah, I mean, the advantage that you have with this is people are always looking for, affordable housing, a place to live. And so because, you picked it up at a good low price point there at 23,000 versus its value, it's not that hard to sell. And the evidence that it's not that hard to sell is that she sold it wholesale, for double the price there. And so made pretty good money on it without actually needing to fix the title, or even fix up the property. So the money that was made on this property was made just by virtue of it being bought well, being bought at a good low price, so they can turn around and sell it to another investor. And the investor that buys it will probably make money on it as well through the purchase. So it's one of the things we can offer to buyers that's nice.
Yeah, when we talk about class three, that's where we move up between $60,000 to $100,000 in value. So for class three properties, really we're looking to spend about 10 to 35% of the property's value. This can obviously include, some lower end condos, homes. We can get into some kind of commercial property within this category, industrial property. In fact, this is a pretty good example. This example is actually a couple of years old. It was an incredible deal they ended up picking up. They picked up this home for $8,500, and it was valued about $80,000. Now, actually, this property, since this deal was done, has actually pretty much doubled in value. So over the last couple of years, this property has gone up quite a bit, but they were renting this property out for $1,400 a month. This is probably one of the better deals that one of our students have purchased, because they were able to pay for the property within a matter of 6 months. And every single month since then, they've been building residual income. Plus, the property has gone up in value, which has doubled their overall profit.
Yeah, I mean, that property is going to triple in value, before very long. It's just a great buy, in a good area there where values are going up. And so, yeah, a deal like this is very easy to sell, because it's highly desirable there, and the numbers work. As the value goes up, again, we can pay up to 45 or 50% on properties, but we don't do it with very many of them. In other words, if we're looking at a lot of properties there in an auction, it might take a bid of 50% to win that property, but it doesn't mean we're going to put a bid of 50% in, just because it's not always worth it. We don't want to win the property at that high of a price, especially if we have concerns about the condition or things that may be wrong with the property, because you could easily lose, a good chunk of money there with a few things being wrong at this price point. So, in other words, we might go up to as high as 45% of value on property. So, this property we're looking at here, could it be worth paying upwards of $45,000 for it? You could. Reasons why we might pay a higher price point, would be if it's newer a little bit, so if it's not as old, or if there's signs that it's been recently remodeled or rehabbed, those are indications or reasons why we might be able to pay a little bit higher percentage of value. But if we don't see signs of that, then we're going to try to keep that percentage of value down as low as we can, just because we need that additional space if something does go wrong with the property. So we're better off trying to pick it up for 35% of value and losing it, than we are, paying 55% of value and winning it.
Yeah, I completely agree with Shade. And one thing that we need to consider is those rehab costs. So, if we were looking at this particular example, and let's say that we saw that it was in worse condition, maybe the roof looked rough, the outside looked like it needed work, the yard was a mess, then would probably try to get that property for 10 to 20 cents on the dollar, because we know that there's going to be a lot of rehab cost involved with it. Looking at the way it is currently, it looks like the roof is okay. The yard looks to be in okay shape. Overall, it looks like a pretty sound structure. Well, it would probably maybe pay up to 35 cents on the dollar. Now, let's say we were looking at this property and it was a home that was only 10 years old in a nice neighborhood. That's the kind of property that we may pay up to 45 cents on the dollar, but it would also be a property upwards of that $200,000 price point. So maybe a home that's worth 100 to 50 to 200,000, maybe if it's in a good enough condition, then we'd be willing to pay 45 cents on the dollar, and we're willing to pay up for that property because we know we're going to be saving a lot of money in the rehab cost.
Yeah. In fact, let me do this here. Give me just a second. I'm going to just grab that link you sent me here real quick, and I'm going to put that up here while we have a second, because I don't want to leave people too long without that. Oh, you're muted.
We're going to go ahead and go through the last category in structures, and then we're going to go look at an upcoming auction and start looking at some properties that are coming up for sale right now, do a quick evaluation of them, kind of go through a little bit of that first stage of due diligence where we go through those 6 steps of, viewing the property, making sure that it's available, checking out the assessor records, checking the market quickly, looking at all of those details to see, hey, is this a property that we want to move on in our research, and start doing stage 2 due diligence, which is really researching the title.
Yeah. Class 5, we would say your property is valued over 200,000, and we can pay upwards of 50%. You might even be able to pay higher than that a little bit, maybe 55%, to win a property. It could be worth it. But again, these properties, usually there's a specific reason we have for being willing to pay a high percentage like that. Like Steve was saying, if we have evidence that the property is, it's not going to need as many repairs, so we can tell that it's newer. So maybe let's see, properties that are built after the year 2000, might qualify for something like that, because again, we know there's much less work we're going to need. At the very least, properties that are newer than what is it, like 1975 or so, 1978. Forget when they did some of the changes there with building and with things like lead and asbestos. A lot of those things you can get out of the way there by the time you're in the mid 70s. But anything older than that, there's always the potential that you can run into a property that needs all kinds of work, and also needs to have all kinds of things removed. Things like things like lead paint and asbestos, may need, maybe all over a property, if it's old enough. So yeah, if a property is new enough, though, that could be a reason why we're willing to pay a higher percentage of value. If the condition of the property is good enough, then it can increase the percentage of value that we're willing to pay. But it's still very much, though, value limited. I mean, if properties are valued between 100,000 and 200,000, it's not going to quite go up to probably 50%. It's probably going to be a little bit lower than that, probably closer to 40%. But where we see a lot of people make mistakes, though, is in paying a higher percentage of value, regardless of how much the property is worth. So we'll see people pay 50% of value or more, sometimes way more than 50% of value, which is almost never going to make sense, at least in terms of trying to make money. It's not really ever going to make sense because it's always going to make it hard for you to sell and limit your profitability.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, this example would be, one that's they probably paid a little bit more than we would have. But I think that there was reason for that. Part of it has to do with the fact that it's on 100 acres and the property value is just pulling the county assessed value. So we think that this property was probably worth an extra 50,000. It was probably closer to 275, 300 based on the land value. Many times the county on a big piece of land like this is going to tax the land at a lot lower rate, which means that they're going to have a lower assessed value. And so because of that, this property is probably worth 250 to 300. But even in there, you can see that they were willing to pay up because there was so much land involved. So even in this type of property, there's still $100,000 worth of potential profit, but that would be the very highest that we would ever go. And this one's probably higher than we would go, unless we did some real good research on that land to see how much big parcels of land like that are selling for, and also might even look into the possibility of subdividing it. Now, we're not going to call the city and go through all those methods right now, but we're going to look into the area a little bit, find out how hard it is to subdivide, because there can be money be made many times by subdividing this type of property and selling it into a couple of different pieces because it's such a big piece of land.
Yeah, that could definitely be a good option with acreage like this. Yeah, the acreage was really the most attractive thing about this property. The property itself seemed to be in decent shape, but somewhat overgrown, and certainly there might, there's probably going to need to be some investment there in order to get it up to a certain level of repair. But coming in at a bid that's roughly 50% of that is still a safe investment, especially if you think that if the valuation on it is low or under what you think it might be worth. You can see how the numbers would be great on that.
Yeah, and part of the reason I think they paid up for that particular home was because it was a newer home. We can see how kind of, it looks like it was overgrown. Maybe they haven't lived there for a while or used it very often. But the property, I think, was built within the last 20 years or so.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
that's kind of part of the reason I think that they were willing to pay up for it, and how they probably still did a good deal on that one. So once we've determined exactly how much we're willing to pay for it, what the property is valued at, in fact, one of the steps in stage 3 due diligence is going through and determining actually what is the market value. Then we're going to calculate our max bid amount. We're going to estimate the price that we can pay for it, how much it's going to cost in rehab, what our profit margins are, and then we're going to stick and set a high bid amount and stick to that high bid amount. We see mistakes all the time where people are, bidding above high bid amounts, or most of the time don't even have a high bid amount. That's the way to lose money. That's the reason when we're working with our members, when we're training one-on-one with our coaching students, we're talking about setting that high bid amount and be willing to walk away. We walk away from properties. We know that it's hard for us. It's going to be hard for you to walk away from a property that you put in some research, you put some time into it, but you're always going to be better off walking away than overpaying for a property, because there's always going to be another property available tomorrow and the day after that, and another auction going on next week. So we'd rather look for another property than overpay for one that we've done some research on.
Yeah, so we generally set property maximum bids at a percentage of value. It's usually how we kind of set the amounts, and so depending on the property type and roughly how much it's worth, we kind of know about where our max might end up. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're always going to go right to the max, because really it's property specific, what we're going to pay. But what the percentages do, though, with those numbers, it does give us an idea of what the maximum amount should be that we could pay if everything else on the property seemed great. And so, it works really well as kind of an outline to help us, understand the property values and what we're paying there on it. And it's also a good way to make sure that, that you're not paying too much. The people that tend to make the biggest mistakes are the ones that don't go in with a plan. They don't have a set amount. They're just they're bidding to win, and that's really where what you've got to watch out for. You can't get into a situation where you're bidding to win the property rather than bidding based on the numbers and based on profitability. That's an easy way to lose sight of it as well, is trying to win, and that's really what auctions rely on, is that desire to win. So yeah, don't hesitate to lose properties. We definitely lose a lot more than we ever win. We probably lose 10 times more than we win. But that's kind of the way it's supposed to work, especially if you're picking out the right properties, and if you're the ones you do win, you're going to win at pretty good prices.
Yeah, it's because we're going into it looking at it as an investment. We're not letting ourselves get emotionally involved. In fact, that was one of the very first things that me and Shade realized was a risk when we first got started and attended our very first auction, is seeing two people that were emotionally involved that didn't do any of the due diligence. We had done the due diligence, and we knew that they were bidding on a drainage basin. But just based off looking off the plat map, because this is before there was even GIS maps, they thought it was a building lot. And so they ended up bidding just as aggressive as we've ever seen. And we realized, hey, this is a mistake. In fact, there was a kid about our same age, this was 25 years ago, that was bidding in front of us. And we were trying to tell him to back out, that we had done our research. And I remember him turning around and being very angry with us. And he said, well, he knows something that you guys don't know. And that was kind of almost an epiphany for us, realizing, hey, there's a lot of people that haven't done the due diligence, and this is the real way that you can lose money in this investment if you don't get educated and know what you're doing.
Well, what it kind of reminds me of? It reminds me of, like, if you're at school and there's a test, it's like coming up, like some people study for the test and some people don't, you know, and if you study for the test, it can be easy to think that everybody else studied for the test, but that's just not usually how it works. Sometimes there are people that get there, and rather than, if you didn't study for the test, and what you're probably going to be looking around more at other people and what they're doing and trying to copy off what they're doing, or using them as kind of a source of information. I think it's that same way with with investing here. Rather than coming in with their own game plan, they're trying to rely on other individuals to kind of give them some idea or direction about what to do, because they didn't do the homework. And so, yeah, I think that happens all the time. In fact, it still happens. We've attended a lot of live sales here over the last few years. And one thing that's unique about live sales is it allows you to see in real time people making poor decisions, with investments. And if you know what the properties are that are being offered up, then whether the bids that are being made are educated bids, whether the people behind them know what they're doing, or whether they have no clue what they're doing. In fact, when they don't know what they're doing, it becomes really apparent sometimes. That's been probably one of the most fascinating things about attending these auctions, is it's changed my perspective. I went into auctions originally believing that everybody that was there, had done research and kind of knew what they were doing, but that isn't the case at all. In fact, the more time that I spend in live auctions, the more I realize that not even half the people have probably done the research, on the properties, and maybe even less than half the people even know how to do the research on the properties. It's very much something where there are a lot of people that are involved with it, but don't have a lot of knowledge about how it works, or about how to do any part of it. In fact, I would say our students in general are far more educated than a lot of these people that I see in live auctions.
Yeah, in fact, that's what kind of prompted us to start training and writing a program about it, is just seeing how many people, hadn't researched the property, hadn't done the due diligence, hadn't set high bid amounts. And really, that's one thing that we see as well at an on-site auction, because with an on-site auction, sometimes you'll get those tire kickers or people there locally that heard, hey, there's a tax sale auction taking place, let's go down and let's try bidding on a property. And that's kind of the difference between online auctions. You'll still see properties get overpaid in online auctions, but usually it's somebody that's at least done some due diligence enough, understands enough to get registered, find the online auction, bid on the property. uh,
Yeah, in
you know,
fact,
if yeah, if it, as I mentioned before, we have some time set aside with our trainers and our coaches. So if you're interested in a strategy session, go ahead and click on the link. I think Shay went ahead and posted that in the chat, and you can set up a time, and we can give you a call and help you get started.
yeah, that's right. And see, when we're going to go into questions here in just a minute, right after the live review.
Yeah.
All right, so let's do this here. Yeah, because I noticed we do have lots of great questions here. We've been reading over those, so we're going to go over those here in just a minute. All right, let's do this. Let's go take a look at an auction that's happening here. And the cell we're going to go and look at here is actually in it's actually not Onondaga County is what it is here. We're going to pull it up. And this is the Syracuse, New York area is where Onondaga is at. And in fact, here, let me just go up here and we'll pull up the entire cell here. So we see all the items that we have. So there's 149 items. It's a pretty good, it's a pretty good size sale. And if we're looking at it, let me give everybody an idea here of where, there we go, Onondaga County here. And here it is in New York. So in fact, yeah, a lot of the areas here that we'll be looking at are all around this. There are lots of properties we see. So a lot of properties in the auction are going to be here in this area here, right around North Syracuse area, or in some of these upper towns right around here, like Clay and Cicero. At least, a lot of the properties that we're looking at here. And this is, yeah, you can get an idea here of where it's at and which part here of New York. Decent location though. It looks like, Onondaga has about 500,000 people. It's got a fairly high population here. But yeah, let's show you the properties because it's a good size sale. New York tends to have some pretty good opportunities with their tax sales. And granted, they have high taxes there, but I used to think New York's taxes were like the craziest, but really the more we look at a lot of states, there are lots of states that have high taxes. And the one thing that New York does offer that people seem to enjoy is they've got good government services there. They tend to have good programs. There's all of those property taxes tend to pay for a lot more things. So it is a nice area to live in. And there's pretty good deals on the properties there. It's a good area there to be able to buy and acquire property. So we've got a mix of properties here. We've got, in fact, let's see how these break down. You can see we've got 42 vacant properties here, vacant residential. We've got a few vacant commercial. We've got 46 single family homes. You'll see there, and we have a few that are manufactured or multifamily.
Yeah, it looks like we've got some that are no category, which is probably something like farmland or recreational land or something like that.
Yeah, so really we could save ourselves time if we wanted just by focusing on specific types of properties we have here. There are a lot of really nice homes though in this sale, and I know there will be good deals that will come out of this sale because there are every year. There's good sales in this auction. But yeah, let's get an idea here of the properties we're looking at. So we have properties at quite a few different value ranges here. We've got properties that are down towards probably, I don't think we've got any tier 1 properties here. I'd have to look here a little bit closer. Let's pull up, I'll show you what we're talking about here. A lot of these are probably tier 2 and above. So here's this property is, they're putting the full market value at about 158. We can see it was built in 1935. It's about 1,140 square feet, 3-bedroom, 1-bath. We've got images of the property. In terms of its age, so this property actually looks like it's, the one thing that's nice about this is it looks like it's still occupied and, being used or lived in here. It's not overgrown really at all.
Yeah, in fact, last year we actually took a group of our students to this auction and bidded on these different properties. In fact, there was some really good commercial land that we bidded on. We almost won some of it, but we just couldn't get enough research that we felt comfortable paying more than what our max bid would be. I mean, we very well could have lost out, but we just couldn't get enough information about all of this commercial land because it was several big pieces of commercial land. But there were some really good deals that came out of the auction.
Yeah, there's some nice neighborhoods in here with really nice properties. This is a great property. This is valued at 229, and again occupied as well here currently.
In fact, let's go ahead and grab that if we can.
And this is the Village of North. So this is North Syracuse.
I'm just kind of interested what maybe some of the online market value tools like Zillow or Redfin might say it's valued at. And whenever we're looking at structured property, doing an online evaluation, we're going to be looking at things like the roof, the foundation, the outside structure as far as siding or brick. We're going to be looking, at any type of potential damage, the condition. It's really important that we do a good on-site evaluation because that's going to help us determine which properties we're actually going to go out and view. If we're not bidding there in person, then we're going to be sending somebody out there to view them. And we want to narrow that down to help save costs to the properties that make sense for us to go by or have somebody go by and view them.
Yeah, so it comes up on Zillow, doesn't come up on Redfin for some reason. But they do have an estimate on it though of 260,000. So let's see, compared to that, what they were saying, 229. So it's a little bit higher there than what it's assessed at. But aside from that, though, for it being built in 1965, it was remodeled or updated sometime in the last 10 years. Or at least I would guess sometime in the last 10 years. It could have been slightly more. But, it's because those are definitely not the windows that came with the property in 1965. The roof is definitely not the same original roof that came with the property in 1965. The siding, looks to be newer or, was probably added sometime, after. There's a lot of things that we can see about the property that are updates. Now we do see window units in the, in the windows. So telling us we don't have an AC unit there on the property, at least not an AC unit there through forced air. But the other stuff we can see, and we have, we've got the utilities there hooked up on the front. Everything looks to be, I mean, it's a good property, and the condition of the property appears to be better than what the age would suggest, which is one of the things we're trying to determine with properties is, is like what kind of condition is it in? And if it's in anything like what it looks like right here, then it's in better condition than a 1965 property should be, unless it's been remodeled.
Yeah, in fact, pointing out those window units, I looked at those as well and thought, okay, this doesn't have central air, but it looks like a lot of it has been rehabbed. The roof looks great. Shade said the windows look great. The siding looks great. The yard looks clean. This would be a great property that we'd be willing to pay a little bit higher, maybe get up into, 35, 40% of the property's value, especially if we do the comparison because the condition looks great. So even though it's older, because we can see the outside has been updated, it's not a guarantee, but it at least gives us an idea that they probably updated the inside as well. Usually if people are spending a bunch of money on the outside, they've spent some money on the inside. Now that's not always going to be the case, but it is, it is the case most of the time. Look at this kind of property here. This one looks like it's been vacant for a while. In fact, one thing I notice automatically in looking at, like, looks like there's something pasted there on the front door. uh, you know, that's automatically at least going to be a bit of a warning sign that that could be. It's not necessarily, but it could be something like a letter from the city essentially saying, hey, you need to do this. You need to, it's a possible demolition letter or a letter saying that the property's been condemned. So that's automatically going to be something we're going to look at if we were to have somebody go do an on-site evaluation, zoom in and get a photo of that so we can see exactly what that says. Plus, we're going to give the city a call to find out what issues may be on this property from them as well.
Yeah, I mean, we can see the property was built in 1938, and obviously the issue here is it's the age of the property, but it's really more about the condition of the improvements. Is because as we've seen, you can have properties that are fairly old but can still be in good shape. This property, like Steve was saying, it looks like it's been sitting vacant for a while. It would not surprise me at all to find out that, let's say, uh, the owner of this property passed away or something and didn't have any family, or that find out this property's been sitting vacant for 3 years. I could believe that. These are the properties we've got to watch out for because again, the longer they've been sitting vacant, the more time you have for things to go wrong, the more things, more issues could potentially come up. And, with this property here, I don't, in fact, just based on what we can see there, I wouldn't bid any percentage amount on the property, just because it is going to need a fair amount of work, and it may be possible, to be able to do some kind of a deal, but it's somewhat value limited in that, they estimate the value at 83,000 on the property, currently. Now, could it be worth more if it was all fixed up? Maybe. But it's not like it's a $250,000 property there where you could put 100,000 into it and fix it up. It doesn't have that much value for fixing up, and so and obviously it needs stuff like, you can tell just a roof alone, just by looking at the roof, looks like it's garbage. And the issue with that is it probably means we've got water leaking inside as well.
Yeah, I was going to point out the same thing right before you said that. That roof looks in rough shape. You can see even the roof over the garage over on the end looks pretty rough. The whole thing looks rough. And so, like Shade said, this is a property we're just going to pass on. Yeah, just based on the condition. It's not something that we want to really get involved in. Now, that next property down, that split level, 2-story, that would be a great property to go after. Again, looking at it, it looks like it has been rehabbed, or things have been done since it was originally built in 1964. That's obviously newer siding, at least not original siding. We can see that, the windows look like they've been upgraded. Overall, it looks like a pretty clean property that would be worth paying money for, because of the condition.
Yeah, it's in great shape. Now, here's an interesting one here right below this, and this one is also one that's been sitting vacant here for a time now. Built in 1961, 1,600 square feet, and this is a property that's been sitting here vacant for probably quite some time now. They've got the value. This one has value that is high enough where it could justify some fixing up. It's 233,000. If we're looking at it, so let's say the property's been sitting here vacant for 2 years, maybe 3. It's hard to tell from what we're looking at out here on the outside. But what's nice about this stuff is that the landscaping stuff we can take care of relatively easy. What we're concerned about is on the inside of the property. And if we were going to buy this property, we'd want to make sure that we picked it up at a low enough percentage of value that it would give us room, to do some of the rehab and repairs on it, if, because most likely they're going to be needed, on a property like this. So this is a property where we might bid this up to, we might limit our bidding and maybe top off at 25% or 30% and not go as high as maybe other bidders would go to a higher percentage in order to try to win this property, but we'd keep it lower just because we're, trying to leave more room for potential repairs and things that might be needed. But this property still has potential to work. I don't think it's lost completely here. It looks like a few years ago it was probably just a regular property like every other one on the block.
Yeah, in fact, I completely agree. We could, even though it does look like, it has been sitting vacant, there are some red flags on it. There's also things that make me think that, hey, the property is savable and could be very profitable. Even looking at the roof there, we can see that there's a bunch of plants growing, but those plants are growing in the gutter. Overall, the roof looks like, at least from what we can see at this angle, looks like it's pretty good over the garage. The windows seem to be shut. And so even though it does look like it needs to be cleaned, we need to take a weed whacker to it. We can see here that the windows seem to be shut. That's always something that we're looking for, because if it's vacant and the window's open, we don't know who's been in the property. We've seen that happen a lot of times. So even though, there are signs and some risk that it's sat vacant, there's also a lot of good things about the property, and it looks like it was pretty structurally sound. In fact, we may go ahead and look this type of property up on Google or Zillow, because if it was listed for sale, we might be able to see when the property sold for and what the condition was at that time. Many times we've looked up property and we can see, okay, look here, here's a bunch of interior photos of the property. Now, granted, these were posted 5 years ago when it sold last, but at least it helps us give an idea of the condition at that time, what the interior looks like, or any additional information they may provided when they originally sold the property.
Yeah, and what's also interesting about this property is that if you were to acquire it, you could easily spend $500,000, maybe even more, just getting it, the outside of it cleared up, cleaned up, getting things cut down, and trying to make it look livable again. But just that step alone would probably make a humongous difference in the curb appeal of this property. Because it would instantly change it from looking like it's been vacant for years to looking like a normal house. and that's all you would probably have to do in order to make this deal work. Is just shake off the the vacancy that's had here for a while and start making it usable again. And you could definitely have this property sold here pretty quickly. Very interesting property. And there's a lot of interesting properties in the sale. I mean, you can see just by looking at them, we've got nice homes, that are built throughout a variety of time frames here. And then there's also rough properties, that you would probably want to avoid altogether. There's everything in between here. But the nice properties are nicer than average. You're going to have a hard time in most states finding tax sale properties that are this good.
Yeah, definitely quite a few good properties. We saw the same thing last year as well. There's also an opportunity that we teach in one of our profiles where you can contact these property owners before the auction has taken place and try to buy the property before the sale. There's a pretty good strategy in using that method. In fact, let's take a look and see if there's any good land that we might want to look at or anything else.
Well, let's see. Oh, I wonder, should I look at the no category or should I look at the vacant residential?
Right. Let's try the no category just to see what they placed underneath the no category.
So
First look like junk lots, so we can avoid these. We automatically even see from the photo it looks landlocked. In fact, that second one, that one there very well could be, or the number 32. That very well could be an easement property. We're gonna have to look a little bit more into it, but I see those big power lines, and that's a little bit of a red flag. We want to check and see, it's big enough that it's probably not.
yeah, so it's listed as 5 acres here, but what we can see though is you can see how that
That's some type of utility thing, I think.
yeah, I mean, you think you were right in the first time, and this probably is a somewhat useless property. It is 5 full acres, and so there's parts of it that are usable, but a good chunk of the property that you would want to use is being used by easement. So you could probably maybe use the same road here going in, potentially. Maybe you could use something down here with it. So maybe it has some use, but about half of its area is being used up roughly by probably by this easement here for this power station.
Yeah, exactly. That's something you've always got to look at because those easements, you know, they're there and they're going to stay there. In fact, I remember this wasn't actually one of our students, but it was somebody who contacted us. They had went to a seminar, learned about tax sale investing, and then just went out there and started buying property. And they ended up buying a property that had cell towers on it, and it was an easement property like that. And once they had purchased it, they found out that they can't rent out or that they can't make money off the cell phone companies and the providers. They thought, hey, they're going to have to pay us rent. We're going to make a ton of money. And as soon as they figured that out, then they started calling everyone they could find that was involved in tax sale training, trying to help them, with the situation. And they ended up calling us. We answered the phone for them, and and looked over the deal. They actually bought this property, and then they bought another property with a home that they didn't do an on-site evaluation, and it had been burnt down. And so, in looking at the deals with them, there wasn't a lot that we could do. We can't help somebody if they've already made that type of mistake. I mean, we gave them strategies on the best thing that they could do with those, and they didn't take those suggestions either. But either way, it put them in a position where they lost, I think, $50,000-$60,000 on those two deals, and essentially had two worthless properties.
And look at how much value that they're assigning, the property. They're putting that 5 acres valued at 602,000. That just seems crazy. They must be assigning it a certain amount of value there for this cell tower, and taxing you for it, I suppose. I don't know. At least I don't know how else they get to 602,000 for this property.
No, it's not on the beach in Miami or something. I don't know why either.
Yeah, that is weird. That one's a weird one there. All right, let's see.
But either way, they're not going to be able to use that property where that cell tower is located.
Yeah, you would want to avoid that property because it would be nothing but problems for you. Is that landlocked here? It's 10 acres.
Yeah, it looks like there's maybe a paper road to it. It also looks like it could be a little bit swampy.
Yeah, well, they've got a really low assessed value there of $4,800 there for 10 acres, and so it probably does have something like that wrong with it. Oh, now they also have these ones in maybe that I don't know if this one is commercial,
Yeah, I think so.
single-use building, 1,400 square feet, valued at 100,000. They're saying.
With any time we see a commercial property, that's where we're going to look up the address. We're going to see if there used to be a company there, look up the company. A lot of times we can find out a lot of information. For example, let's say that we find a property that used to be a restaurant. We can look up online, see when that restaurant was in business, when it went out of business. Many times get photos of those property because people have been there or taken photos there, done something, and at least give us a better idea of what we're buying and what it was as of a couple of years ago.
I can see the wildflower nails and spot next to it, which I think we can see that's probably the building there to the right.
Yeah,
Oh, it's some kind of cleaners.
no, it was. Now, the fact that it was a cleaners, let's say it was a dry cleaning business, we're going to do one other step with this property. We're going to check up the address on it, the EPA website, because, the fact that it's an industrial property, it probably doesn't have any type of EPA action on it, but it's worth checking out. It looks like it was called Jack's Cleaners, probably.
Yeah, yeah, it was Jack's Cleaners. Look at that.
Oh,
Environmental easement package. What is this? Jack's Dry Cleaners. Yeah, this is exactly why you gotta watch out for stuff like this.
requires an environmental easement. At least you have who you could contact about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, so if we were to bid on this property, this is something we need to look into and find out more about it. Because let's say that there's, some type of big fine on it, and you purchase the property thinking you're getting a great deal, just to find out that there's a $60,000 fine or lien that's been placed on it for some type of environmental issue.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely something you would want to watch out for. And dry cleaning businesses are, one of those things specifically that seem like they oftentimes are at issue with EPA. That one looks like something. Oh, that one's more. You know what it is that one is also
Easement.
more easement. Yeah, it's more easement property, abandoned agricultural land. So they're calling it there, but it's got two big towers on it, 2.7 acres. No, they valued it at 12,000 there, which that could fool you if you weren't careful.
It looks like they placed at least some of the junk in the commercial properties in here. It looks landlocked. That one, want the address, the next one down, that one maybe it's not landlocked.
Oh, it's 0.13. It's just tiny.
Yeah.
Oh,
Look at
look,
that value
some
they're
kind of
charging.
small building on it.
Yeah, that makes you worry when you can't even see it.
Yeah, I mean, if there is a building there, it's buried. It looks like. Is it one of those buildings?
You'd think if it was, they would have took some photos of it. I think it's behind.
Oh, it probably.
See that blue?
I wonder if it's back there. You think?
I don't know. It might not be. That's where we check the GIS map to get an idea of exactly where the lot sits.
Yeah. Yeah, they do seem like they have a lot of their junk in the miscellaneous here. Well, some of the lots are bigger. This one's also probably, though, it looks swampy. $2,000 value is probably a good chunk of that reason why. Yeah, I think I'd probably avoid most of this stuff. It's in the miscellaneous anyway, or that's not classified here specifically. Now, the vacant raw land, let's see, residential vacant, maybe it's not, maybe it's a little bit better.
These ones with the photos, some of those could be buildable lots. But again, before we buy any of the properties, this one's 166 feet by 200 feet, has a value of $40,000. So this very well could be a buildable lot. because they're showing both value, it's showing some type of size, but that doesn't mean that it's a guarantee to be a buildable lot. That's where we've got to check into the zoning. We've got to do our research on it and make sure that it is by looking at the zoning code, looking at the zoning map. Otherwise, we could be buying a property that we think has high value, but really limits that value by the fact that it can't be built on.
Yeah, it's definitely not like any standardized size lots there either. They're all different sizes. Now let's see if any of these other pieces of land. Two acres at 22,000. All right, that's not too bad. That one looks like a leftover. Yeah, okay. Here's a retention ditch. And a good good example of property you would just want to avoid. From looking at it overhead, it's clear that it's not usable. It's not shaped like the other lots. But even if it was big enough that somebody could put something on, the issue you would run into is with easements. I think you're going to find it's low ground all the way down. Probably all the way down to the water here. I don't know if you've got some kind of ditch or something here on the other side of it. The shape is part of the issue, but the water kind of tells us the story here on this.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree.
Now there are some that where you're not sure if they're leftovers or if they are something in between. Now that actually, sometimes properties like this have potential.
The one thing I would need to check, or we'd need to check.
Landlocked, yeah.
Yeah, if it has a roadway easement, see how there's a road going out near the property? If there's a roadway easement that we can drive through their property to access this property, then this really could be a decent piece of land to look at. Does have minimal value based on the size, but if it does have an easement, then it's at least worth looking at. But if it doesn't have an easement and we can't drive through this road to get to this property, then it would be a property that we would completely avoid. That's the reason research is so important. You just can't look at something and expect that it's going to be workable or usable. We've got to research into it.
Yeah, these lots, let's see how they're valued. See, each one of these lots is valued at 20,000. Even these are saying they don't have road frontage. Are they on paper roads? That must
Yeah.
be on a paper road.
What we mean by paper road is essentially there's a road that's been planned, as we can see there on the map, but the road hasn't been built. So most of the time we're going to avoid paper roads unless we can see that they may be expanding the road or it's very, very close to the road, or if we could get it for a real, real cheap price, like pennies on the dollar, a couple of percentages value. Otherwise, we'd avoid that kind of property.
Yeah, in fact, yeah, a lot of these here would be worth just avoiding, or at least are not the kinds of properties we would usually go after. They're leftover pieces. These are kind of leftover chunks of land.
Yeah, there's a reason why some of those properties that we see are landlocked are in the tax sale to begin with.
Yeah.
Before we finish up, do you happen to have that link around for the auction where we saw properties sell for $1?
Yes, I think I do.
We won't spend a lot of time on this. We actually created a YouTube video that's going to be premiering this afternoon in about 45 minutes. So if you're interested, go ahead and check out our YouTube channel, and we'll go over more detail.
Oh, we also need to get to the questions here.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and finish up the questions and then.
Yeah, let's see here. Oh yeah, I do have this up here.
We don't need to spend a lot of time. I just think it'd be interesting to kind of look at it quick. If it's too hard to find, don't worry about it.
No, I've got it right here.
This is by far some of the cheapest property that we've seen sell in a tax sale auction. As little as $1.
Yeah, they've actually got quite a bit of properties, and also a lot of properties that sold for a single bid, or only had one bid on them. So we have properties. Let's show you. There are a lot of these that sold for $1, and some of the properties that sold for above that are actually, were not bad. I mean, properties like this one that sold for 2,900. you know, is not a bad little house here. Let me get a bigger image of that. But we can also grab the parcel number and we can pull up information on any of these if we want. But that's a pretty nice, you know, property there for $2,900. And then we see properties that sold for $1 or didn't even get bids in some cases here. Let's see. So here's property didn't get bids. No bid. This one sold for $3,400. This one, no bids on this one. This one did get a bid. So this one sold for $500. You know, got a single bid there for $500 and sold at that. This house here sold for $3,400. Yeah, not very much. You know, tiny little amounts here. You know, $1,500 on that commercial
Yeah.
property there.
Yeah, look at that commercial one. I'll see if they have a little bit bigger photo. You know, I almost think that is either a commercial or a duplex.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are quite a few of these. Let's see.
Yeah, there was some lots in here that sold for $1 that had an assessed value of 20 grand. Nice big lots. There's a few that ended up selling for higher prices, you know, 2 or 3 grand. But, you know, so there were some pretty good properties that sold in this particular sale.
Yeah, in fact, well, let's see here. The one I was looking at there, it actually got a bid.
You looking for that larger lot?
Yeah, I was wondering which one that one was.
I think it was. I think it either that fountain one or the one above it. No, it wasn't that fountain one because that one sold for 200. But you know, pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, these are crazy deals here on a lot of these properties that sold for such low prices. And yeah, a lot of these properties are also pretty desirable. You know, are good usable properties. Yeah, I mean, and so many of these just didn't get bids. Yeah, didn't have any bids at all.
Yeah, we actually found some usable properties on this list that didn't even have any bids, like Shade said. So we'll actually go through this more in our YouTube video. We'll kind of go through, look up the records, look up some of the assessed values, things like that.
Yeah. We can go through and pull up parcel numbers here with each one of them. Now, let me go through and also hit up some of the questions that we've had because we've had a lot of really great questions and I don't want to miss these. Okay. All right. Now, see, the first question here is I'm figure out where to start here with this one. Okay, since construction costs have gone high, I'm now thinking about focusing on houses as opposed to buying vacant lots. I'm not sure if folks are motivated to construct on vacant lots, but since I haven't found success with auctions, should I focus on over-the-counter deals? Okay, so one of the things we should probably talk about, this is actually, I'm glad this question gets asked here because over-the-counter opportunities, you know, they were really they were something that happened, or they were there because of the auction systems that were being used, and because of the lack of investors that could actually attend or be there in person. I mean, really, for the most part, a lot of the over-the-counter stuff, what we're dealing with is just the counties struggled to try to bring investors or get investors to come out to the sale back before they were doing anything online. You know, the issue is that since counties have started moving to online auctions, it's become so much easier to buy that counties aren't really having any any over-the-counter inventory anymore. If they do have over-the-counter inventory, it's the stuff that's left over that you don't want to mess with. You know, it's the stuff that, you know, if they sold pretty much everything they have that isn't any good, then what they have left is not really worth going after. You know, it's not really worth having, and that's the concern, or that's the risk. You know, is you know, it's owning the property, you know, that you don't want.
Yeah, and there's still opportunity with over the counter, you know, in some states, Pennsylvania, with even Arkansas, they do their over the counter differently now, where they re-auction them in an online auction. But as far as the question of buying land, as long as we can get it for cheap enough, even though construction costs have come up, we still are having a lot of success with it. Our students are having a lot of success with it. But it's all about picking it up for the cheap enough price and then being able to resell that, for some type of profit margin. But, there's only so much land available. And so if we can get it for cheap enough, it's still going to be a good value. Another thing that has happened is that some of the over-the-counter lists have turned into land banks. And so that's another area where there is a buying opportunity to buy both land, to buy, homes, structured property is through some of these government land banks. In fact, if you are a member, you can go down to our land bank section and look at all of the different land banks available. And that's really one of the better avenues as well to find over-the-counter properties, is through these land banks.
Yeah, in fact, the question went on a little bit more here. It was asking, I said, I've looked at several repository lists in Pennsylvania, but any other states? Several others have land banks, so it doesn't make sense. I just attended a forfeited land auction in Ohio, but no success. Ohio Cleveland a good option? They have recurring auctions, but those are foreclosure mortgage auctions. Okay, so the one thing I would first say here is the one thing that you can take advantage of today better than ever before, and you couldn't have done maybe even 15 years ago, is participate in more sales that are online, sales that you don't have to go to in person. And quite frankly, between if we're talking about different kinds of foreclosure sales that are happening, yeah, every county that holds tax sales also has their bank foreclosure sales, that they have. And those have the potential as well to be good deals. I mean, at least any properties that that are being sold for less than what's owed. But the issue there is that it's not a true foreclosure, in that the bank is going to sell it to you, and the lender, basically, the person that borrowed the money may have defaulted, but it's still the bank's ownership, and they still are going to determine and dictate how much they're willing to sell it to you for. You might be able to get a discount a little bit, but they're not going to let you just buy it at a low percentage of value there because it's in a mortgage sale. Like I said, there can be good deals in some of those mortgage sales, though. But no, the one thing you can do today, though, is you can participate in more auctions. And so if you don't have success in a certain area, first off, if it's an online auction, it's a good area for you to kind of go back and to participate in again when they hold another sale. But part of what I think you want to do, though, is participate in more auctions, give yourself more chances to squeeze the trigger and to bid on properties, so you can give yourself a chance to win. At least, it sounds like you've tried quite a bit and you've had, you haven't had success yet. And in some ways, that's actually, I'm sure that it's disappointing for you, but I'm glad that you haven't won properties at high prices. The fact that you've been participating and you haven't won yet at least tells me that you've got, that you're sticking to your guns, because that's kind of the way it's supposed to work if you're doing it right. If you're doing it wrong, then you could probably acquire lots. But if you're doing it right, you're going to lose a lot of properties. But the point, though, is that when you do finally win properties, you're going to win them at good rates and they'll be profitable. And then you can kind of establish areas you can go back to. It sounds like you're right on the edge of breaking through. It's just a matter of landing that first deal with one of these auctions. And if you participate enough, that's bound to happen. Especially if you're bidding on enough properties, you're going to win eventually.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even just like that auction that we were looking at just a second ago, with properties selling for as little as $1. That was an auction that we had listed on our auction calendar. And sometimes some of these small auctions can be good opportunities, where, something like Bid for Assets have been around for 15 or 20 years, have been doing tax sales for that same amount of time. People understand and will go there for looking at lists. What we try to do with our membership program and our list service is look for all of these other areas as well, that maybe they're a law firm that just handles one county and they do it one time a year, but because they're not blasted and everyone doesn't know about them, there's going to be less competition, which means that we're going to get better opportunity. And so, I agree with Shade. I think just keep up the good work. The one thing that we do need to look at as far as Cleveland is concerned is there can be water bills. that attach to the property. So whenever we're looking at Cleveland real estate, we're going to be sure to do our due diligence and check in to see if there's any type of water liens, because some of them have been outrageous in the past where people haven't paid for 5 or 10 years and they've got this huge water lien on it. So that would be one thing that we would look at.
Yeah. Let's see. Another question here is, what is the best way when living far from a property that you've won to make the property alluring, such as, the assessment, local ordinances, zoning, et cetera, to sell to an investor, and best places to advertise? That's a couple of great questions there. So I guess the first thing that we do with the property in the area, is we try to pick an area where we know properties are moving. So we try to check for that when we're looking into the market, and we see about how many properties are selling and about where our price point is at with our property compared to other properties in the area. But what we do to make it appealing, so there's certain things that we can do with the property to make it appealing. And a lot of it depends on how much we've invested into it, because if we're not into it very deep, then we're probably not going to do anything to the property there on site, at least unless we have to. Unless we have to do something. So if it's land, we may not do anything there with it. A lot of times we don't unless we need to. If it's a home, then that's different. We need to improve. Basically, we need to make it alluring to buyers, and that's where we're going to do a lot of work, like try to get the landscaping cut down, try to get the property looking more presentable, for curb appeal, essentially. But a lot of it, though, when it comes down to selling, we try to include a lot of this information about the property here in our listing. So if it's a usable property, then we try to include information that explains exactly why it's usable. That it meets this requirement, it meets that requirement. We try to include more information rather than less to allure or to draw in our buyers. We also use, I guess, additional information or post on additional places. There's probably a lot of different ways that you can try to sell. Also, I guess, depending on how much traffic we get in the area, and how big of an area it is. But there's so many different online sources now where we can post properties, to look for things like investors. And so the nice thing is you can pretty well create one listing that you can post and repost over and over again. And so, getting it on more services is obviously a big factor, but there's so many services today that are new or just starting, they're branching out. There's so many ways you can get it in front of more people than you could have, let's say, 10 years ago. So I don't know if you would even necessarily have to have it on too many services here before you're going to get some attention on it. If you've got it priced aggressively, a lot of times you'll get attention on the property before you even. I mean, we get attention on some properties right after we buy, before we even have the properties listed. Just because individuals are interested in the property, will look up and see who owns it and contact us. We have that happen all the time, and so. I guess there's all different factors. I wish there was an easy one-shot thing there, but it's the whole package together that makes the property attractive. And so all those things together tend to work out best for us getting more eyes on the property and getting it sold. The other thing is if property's slow and it's not moving, changing up how we're selling it, like offering up things like something like seller financing, or changing up the pricing on it. These are all things you can do to help get a property that's stagnant to move.
Yeah, and Shade actually brings up a real good point as far as writing our ads. When we're writing our ads for sell listings, we try to include information to help educate the buyer. So if it is a tax deed property, and let's say that we're wholesaling it, meaning we're selling it as is, then we may we purchased this property through a tax foreclosure auction or a judicial foreclosure auction. You will receive a quit claim deed, or using that kind of terminology. In fact, we have actual forms examples that we have in our form center on the website. But at least then when somebody gives you a call, they are looking at it, they understand why it's a discount. It doesn't automatically look like a scam. So if there's a bunch of building lots and the cheap ones for 10,000 for sell locally, and you have yours listed at 5, well, they're going to think, well, why is this one so much cheaper? We're telling them why it's so much cheaper right there in the listing to a degree. Hey, I picked up this property, I'm selling it, moving it on. There's we're selling it for a discount, and this is the reason why we're selling it at the discount. Also, posting it on Zillow, obviously, that's going to help attract buyers. Placing it on Facebook Marketplace is another great tool to be able to offer your property. And then, of course, even Craigslist. All three of those are going to target a different type of individual that's looking at property, which gives ourselves a better chance of being able to sell the property because it's going in front of different types of people.
Yeah, I think all those are pretty good ideas here for places that you can list the property. It's amazing though. We actually sell a lot of properties too through neighbor letters, and sometimes we'll send out more than one round of neighbor letters. So, if we've got a property and we send out neighbor letters, which that's usually the very first thing we do, just because a lot of times it's effective, and we'll find buyers through the neighbor letters. But if we have sent them out and we haven't heard anything for 3 months, we'll send out another round of neighbor letters. Maybe just to let them know that we're changing up something, or we're going to offer seller financing, or we're going to do something to make it more attractive. The other thing is, if we list properties at like 50% of what they're estimated to be worth, we tend to attract investors anyway. So a lot of our ability to attract investors kind of depends on how we have the property priced out. And if we have it priced out, way under market value, it tends to be investors that are usually interested anyway. And yeah, and if we price it closer to market, then I think we're usually looking for more of like we're going to deal with more with buyers, more like retail buyers, than we will necessarily investors. At least that's been our experience with our pricing.
Yeah, and also when you do talk to somebody, it's important to educate them. Even tell them in a matter of a minute or two how you picked up the property, that it's gone through a tax foreclosure that eliminates mortgages, judgments. You've researched the property, there aren't any liens, or if there are liens, you paid those liens off, and essentially they're getting a clear property. At that point, they can either decide to go through quiet title, pay the cost, and go through the quiet title process so they get a warranty deed, or they can just own the property. And after owning it for a certain period of time, depending on the state, you can get a warranty deed. For example, we purchased a property in Florida that we were using as a rental. And so instead of spending the money to go through quiet title at that point, we just went ahead and rented out the property for 4 years. And after 4 years, we could go ahead and get a warranty deed because we had been paying property taxes and owned that property for so long.
Yeah. All right, another question here. When looking at land in tax deed auctions, how do you assess land when it has an antenna on it, like the cell tower? It's a good question, because of the nature of tax sales, we're always looking at land and looking for potential risks or things that may make the property unusable. And that's just because we know that a higher percentage of the properties that are going into this are going to be junk. Because people don't want to pay property taxes, and junk land is generally the first thing that they're going to let go because it doesn't matter. And so we have to watch out for all of those properties. We basically have to weed out and sift through the junk in order to find the stuff that is good. And so one easy way is just, if there's ever any question about it, we just ignore the property, if we're not certain, but if it looks like there's things on the property, anything that is related to a utility like power, or if there's anything related, so any kind of power lines that we see, or any kind of a cell tower, or if there's things related to like the water, and you see, the water stuff there, it's all pretty well the same, in that all of it is going to stop us from being able to use the property from anything other than that purpose. And because of that, the properties usually don't have a lot of interest for us, and so we'll just ignore them. So usually a sign like that, if we see anything like that, like if there's a big antenna on it or something like that, I mean, unless it's like a very large piece of land, we're probably just going to ignore it.
Yeah, for example, that 5-acre parcel with that cell tower, the first thing we're going to do is what we talk about in stage 2 due diligence, is we're going to research the title and the deed. We're going to see exactly what that easement includes, what the restrictions are on the easement. And then from there, we're going to determine how much of that property is usable. So maybe only, half of the property is usable. Then we can get an idea of what real estate is selling for in that area. But we've also got to dock the price a little bit for the fact that there is an easement on the property, that there is a big cell tower right there, and somebody might want to build their home right next to that cell tower. So that property could still be usable. It could still have value, but we've got to discount the fact that there is an easement. There's easements that make a big deal, and there's easements that don't. In fact, some of you guys probably have an easement on your property and you don't even realize it. There could be a underground power line or water line or something like that that goes through your property, and it really doesn't affect anything. And that's the reason they put the signs out there that say, call before digging, is because there could be an easement. But an easement like that will affect the property value. Part of the property is going to be used for the easement. And then it's our job to see, is there anything left on that property that could be used for something other than what the easement is used for. In fact, if we can go back to our slides, we can do the look at that bad deal real quick, and then we can answer any of the other remaining questions.
Oh yeah, you bet.
In addition to showing you guys good deals, we like to review, bad deals as well, where we don't know what the investor was thinking, because it's a good way to show you how to avoid risk. In fact, we did one, and we put a video out on YouTube just recently, and we also talked with our students before we did that about a beach house in Michigan that essentially the investor lost anywhere between $600,000 to $800,000 on it by overbuying and overpaying.
Yeah, I mean, lots of mistakes you can make. We've talked a lot about the pricing on it, and how our bidding percentages are so important. And you can tell that all that went right out the window. This person didn't have any kind of a plan about what they were wanting to pay. They were just going to win the property, And unfortunately for them, they were bidding against somebody else that must have had the same idea, And that's how you get a property that can bid all the way up there to pretty much market value. And even then, the only reason they don't pay more is just because, they at least have the sense to know that it's not worth more than market, but up until that, though, again, no real idea here, about what they're doing. And so, yeah, this person pretty well, they paid close to $1 million. I mean, they paid, nearly $800,000 cash just for the property. Then they have all these fees, that probably amount to, close to $100,000 in fees, and the property is probably valued at about $900,000. And so the real issue here is that they've put nearly $1 million into a property that they can't even see the inside of. I mean, they could very well they could go inside. This property was built in 1937. Maybe it hasn't been remodeled since 1964. They wouldn't know that yet, just because they can't see inside it. They're having to assume a lot. They have to assume everything about this property and the inside of it, because we know nothing about it. And that is a pretty risky step when you pay that much, for a property, that could be in need of several $100,000 worth of work. You never really know, until you get into it. So yeah, my guess is on this property that, they're going to lose money on any of the work that they have to do on the inside of it. Just because I don't know that it's going to be worth much more than $900,000 when they're done. So if they have to sink $100,000 into it, that's just going to be another $100,000 they lose.
Yeah, exactly. And in this type of neighborhood, this is a neighborhood that has close to $1 million homes on it. And so if we're talking about rehabbing the property, you can't just go in there and do what we call lipstick rehab. You're not going to be able to sell the property. All of the properties that are selling for probably, $800,000 to $1 million on this street are upgraded, have nice furnishing, nice woodwork, because that's what that properties within this area are going to require to be able to sell it for market value within that area. And so automatically in buying this property, and if they try to resell it, maybe they can only sell it for 750 or 700,000, which is automatically going to make them lose 250,000. Let's say they put an additional 100 grand into rehabbing the property. It's got some size to it. We can see it's 4 bedroom, 3 bath, 2,300 square feet. So it's a larger property. That means it's going to cost a lot more to rehab a property of that size. And so they could easily put an additional $200,000 into the property where they've already paid more than the property is valued at. So yet we don't think there's a real way that the investor that purchased this home, even though it may be in a good area, can make money on the property because they overpaid for it at the auction. and they still have all of those rehab costs that are going to be on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to go and look at, at what's selling in this area, to compare this to, I guarantee that most of the properties we're going to find in this price range are going to look amazing. They're going to look awesome because people aren't going to spend $1 million, on a property unless it looks amazing, unless it has been, I mean, most of these are going to be fresh remodels, that have just been done, and so the properties are going to look excellent. And that's what you're going to have to compete with, as a buyer, because if this is an investment here, the whole idea with this is that you would buy it, be able to turn around and flip it, after you've gone through and done certain renovations or fix-ups on it. And yeah, you could easily lose money on all of that. But even then, I don't know if it's going to be worth any more than the 900,000. Even if you did special things to it and you could increase the value, you're probably not going to increase it any more than what you're putting into it, in order to do it. So yeah, that's the real challenge here, is they haven't really left themselves any kind of a profitability, no cushion here for profitability, where they're pretty much selling the property for what they paid right now, and that's if they don't put any money into it. If they do put money into it, then they're going to start losing. But yeah, definitely not the direction of things you want to do.
No, exactly.
Let's see, we got a couple more questions here. Let me just answer them. Let's see. Okay, have you invested in foreclosable tax liens in the past? I briefly hear people speak on the topic, but there is not much information available on how to get started. Is it true that a tax lien can be in the county inventory, and once purchased, it can be immediately sold? So I think what we're talking about here are over-the-counter tax liens would be what I think you're talking about. And it sounds like what you're talking about would be over-the-counter tax liens that have been sitting on the books for longer than the redemption period is. So in other words, they have redemption periods that have expired and they're eligible for foreclosure. Some of this stuff, it might be true. I mean, at least in some ways. Technically, it might be true in that, yeah, there are properties, that is how it works. But you don't necessarily have a lot of over-the-counter liens that are just sitting there so much in states, because most of the states that offer liens will, offer those liens up publicly. Investors can buy them, and then the investors, once the redemption period expires, if the investor hasn't been paid back, then they can start to pursue foreclosure, on those individual properties. And again, that basically just gives the opportunity for the owner to either pay off delinquent taxes, or the redemption period expires, and so the lien holder at that point can foreclose on the properties for what's owed in delinquent taxes and fees. So yeah, it is doable, but the issue is that the over-the-counter liens were really more they were a product of auctions prior to the internet. They were a product of counties trying to hold auctions and having more property available than they really had investors that were showing up to buy. And that's not so much a problem we have anymore now that auctions are moving online. And because of that, also a lot of the over-the-counter inventory that maybe existed in the past is also probably going to go away. Now, not everywhere. There's probably still areas where they're conducting their sales live and in person, and they still don't have a lot of people, attending it. And there may be over-the-counter opportunities in some of those areas, with tax lien states. But I don't know if I would say I'm trying to think about states here where you could potentially do it here.
Well, a state could be like Nebraska, for example. Only one county in Nebraska has their auction taking place online. So that could be an area. South Carolina, those auctions aren't held online. So there could be an opportunity. So whenever we're looking at it, there's even a couple of Florida counties that don't have online auction tax lien sales. Most of them do. So when we are looking for over the counters that we might be able to start the foreclosure on process quicker, it's going to be those areas where, and the states where online auctions aren't taking place. Indiana is another state where they don't have all of their online auctions, all of their counties using online auctions. So those are going to be the states that we would probably target. We have had students acquire property through tax lien certificates. We had one student that acquired a really nice property in Colorado. We had another student that acquired property in Maryland, actually a couple of different properties in Maryland, through purchasing over-the-counter tax liens and then waiting out the rest of the redemption period and then starting the foreclosure. But Shade's right, with a lot of these tax lien auctions coming online, that means that there's going to be less people, or there's going to be less over the counters, just by the fact that anyone can bid on these properties. So if it makes sense, it's a usable property where something like a building lot might have been ignored in the past because they were limited by how many people attended the live sale. Now it's an online sale, that's going to open it up to a lot more people to bid on them.
There was a question about where, what state and county were these properties auctioned off at, and this is the, this is the state and county right here. So it's Vanderburgh County, Indiana. This was the sale that they did. It was a sale here that started in August and wrapped up here in September, I think.
Yeah.
All right, let me see here. Let's see. Okay, now I use a guy on Fiverr who does pretty in-depth property title searches for each property for $10. Is there anything else you could recommend? So when it comes to something like Fiverr, it's kind of hit and miss. If you've got a guy that's doing a pretty good job for you at a good low price, then it's probably worth sticking with and using. Generally, though, when it comes to the steps that we use to kind of research the title, a lot of the people on Fiverr are going to be using the same resources you would use. So they're going to have access to the same records. But there are some people on Fiverr that may have access to additional search tools and records that make it a little bit easier for them to find some of that same information. And so really the main issue is whether you are hiring somebody that knows how to find the liens. If they do, then it's usually, they'll work out great. As long as they can find the liens that, that you're looking for, then, that's usually good enough. I don't know, we don't necessarily have to we don't have to go in crazy depth here in our title research because we're usually not going back further than an owner or two. So we're usually not going back that far in time. We're just trying to figure out the recent history with the property so that we can figure out who we need to look for when we're looking for liens.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good answer to the question.
Yeah.
One thing to mention is Shade's reading the questions. Again, you guys all have the opportunity, the people that attended today, to sign up for a strategy session. So if you click the link in the description, we can go ahead and get you set up and give you a call and help answer any of the questions that we didn't go over today.
Yeah. Okay, let's see other questions here. Okay, so if there's a property for sale I found, and it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 5 acres for $150,000, not a tax lien, is there a way to contact or to contract that and sell it to an investor or rent it to own, then buy and take over the note? Is that a great way to start, or the auctions first? So yeah, actually what you're talking about there is what we would call a pre-foreclosure with tax sales, and they exist just like they do with bank foreclosures. So when we first started, when Steve was first working as a real estate agent, he worked in his office with a guy that had been a real estate agent, but basically had quit being an agent, let his license lapse because he was a full-time investor. And what he was investing in was what he called notice of defaults. And what this was, as soon as somebody would default on their mortgage, the mortgage company fills out, a default notice and turns it in there with the county. He would go and get those county notices of, the defaults. And then from there, just because you have a bunch of defaults doesn't mean that you necessarily have deals. He would pull up the properties, and then he would do the research to figure out how much was owed on each one of these properties for their mortgage. So if if the property was upside down, or if there was more money owed on the property, basically, or there was no money to be made, so if there was $200,000 mortgage on a $200,000 home, he would just ignore those because there wasn't anything he could do. But if there was properties there where it was a $60,000 mortgage on a $200,000 home, then that would be an individual that he would reach out and contact to try to put a deal together. And it's the same concept with tax sale properties. We have a list of individuals, they're about to lose their properties, with any of the tax sale lists that we're looking at. There's nothing stopping you from being able to make contact with that individual and make some kind of an agreement with them on their property outside of the sale. So if you can make contact with the individual and get them to sell, then certainly you could do that. You could do that, and you could make money on it. You could probably do really well. Now we know that pre-foreclosures do happen with tax sales. There's no doubt about it. They do happen, and you could certainly use it as a strategy to try to pick up properties here before the sale. And as long as you pay off the property taxes, there are certain advantages to it even. In fact, you wouldn't have to go through quiet title because you'd still have a clear title. So that'd be one of the advantages right off the bat, is that you wouldn't have to go through and deal with all the title stuff. So yeah, you could certainly do deals like that. The bigger issue normally is just that, well, there are deals that can be made sometimes. Maybe people just need, the opportunity, they need the cash, and if you can work something out with them on the cash, on some kind of a loan for it, but you could make a deal like that work. But with some tax sale properties, you just have individuals that have passed away or just no longer there, and that's, it's going to be hard to work out a deal like that with those individuals. And so, yeah, certainly you can do pre-foreclosures though, and they will work. Just like they'll work with bank foreclosures. In fact, you could probably utilize pre-foreclosures in most counties that you're going to work, or try to do tax sale stuff. If you have enough time before the sale, a month before the sale or so, that's probably the main limitation you'd have. It's just making sure you have enough time to work out a deal if you can get somebody in contact with you.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, it's something that we teach our students how to do. We have a couple of different trainings. We have one that talks about how to do pre-foreclosures with structured property, but we also have a specific one that talks about how to doing the pre-foreclosure strategy with land. In fact, I think that is a totally untargeted market as far as investors contacting landowners. Let's say that you find a $30,000 lot where they owe $2,000 or $3,000 in back taxes. They live out of state. If we're able to contact that owner and say, hey, your property's coming up for sale, it's going to be sold for back taxes here next month. I'd like to give you pay off your property taxes plus put an extra $3 or $4 grand in your pocket. A lot of these people are already letting the property go, and so the fact that they could make some money on the property is going to be a good deal. Plus, you get a warranty deed. So we've got to check for any liens or judgments or mortgages that could still attach to the property, and that's part of the process we talk about in the training, is putting all of those things together to figure out what our profit margin would be. But something like a piece of land most of the time isn't going to have a mortgage on it, which means that we've automatically eliminated that. We could very well buy this free and clear, and we can get a warranty deed on it, which means we don't have to go through the quiet title process. So there's a great opportunity in doing that pre-foreclosure strategy.
Yeah, in fact, on average, tax sale properties almost never have mortgages against them. Most properties, if there is any kind of like lenders that are involved, or if there are other parties that are involved, then they usually avoid foreclosure altogether. But the properties that make it onto this list are generally properties that have no mortgage, and that's why they're foreclosed on. For mortgage, the foreclosure notices go out, but they're just going out to a limited number of people, that aren't responding, or maybe they can't respond because, they're no longer here. So yeah, we see that with a lot of properties here, but yeah, none of these properties I think are going to have mortgages on them. Certainly if they make it through the foreclosure, they don't usually have anything like that on them. And it kind of makes sense if you look at them. A lot of these properties, you can understand the idea that somebody may have, acquired this property 50 years ago or 70 years ago, and it's been paid off for a long time. And that's how I think it is with a lot of these properties. It's that they were just they were paid off long ago, and it's how they can end up on this list.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and really, this is a need. A lot of these properties, like Shade mentioned, the owners will find have died. In fact, that's one of the things that we see as we're going through and doing our due diligence and looking at the legal records, is we'll find where people have passed away. We'll find death certificates. We'll find probate information. And if they don't have any heirs or haven't set that up and the house becomes abandoned, after a period of time, the county's going to go ahead and foreclose on it and put it on the market. And it's good to be able to bring a buyer in there to fix the property up, put it back into productive use. Otherwise, you're going to have squatters, you're going to have illegal activities done. And that's part of the reason where there is, a lot of abandoned properties in some of these cities, they're creating land banks to go in there and board the property up, to put them in touch with investors that are willing to buy these properties at a discount to fix it up so that it again becomes a productive property that can be used.
Yeah, another good question here is, Onondaga County allows you to purchase through online auctions using a credit card. Do you have a list of states or counties that allow this? And other than looking through each one's rules individually, actually, it's kind of a challenge because it's something that's changed just recently, and a lot of it has changed as counties have moved over to online auction systems, or as they switch over to new online auction systems. We've seen a lot of counties change their official policies for the funds that they collect and what they're willing to accept. It More and more auctions though now are allowing buyers to pay using more online resources like credit cards. It's becoming far more common than it's ever been before, and a lot of times it's something that can go by state. So in other words, as we find counties here in New York, that have online auctions where they'll allow credit cards, a lot of the other counties there within the state that are offering will also allow payment through the same method. Um, on the flip side of that, like there are other states, where it is just kind of the opposite. But most of those are not dealing with online auctions. Most of the companies that are dealing with online auctions have to deal with good online methods of payment like that. Like Oklahoma, this year was still almost entirely cash. With everything they did, they wanted to deal with cash. All of these counties are doing the online auctions now are kind of the opposite, where they're trying to make it more convenient for buyers, to use things like their credit cards to pay. And I know for a lot of you, that also makes a difference, in you want to be able to pay for things using a credit card.
Yeah, well, and kind of an answer to that as well is it's really difficult to make a list because each county is individual, and some of the counties we've seen may uh, allow a credit card for the entire purchase or may have a credit card that's used for the down payment. So, automatically they'll charge 10% or 15% of what the winning bid is, and then you've got a certain period of time to wire over or send them the rest of the funds. So really, we've got to we've got to check each one. We've got to do the exact same thing ourselves. We can put out and say areas like New York or like Michigan that will allow credit cards, but if we're talking about individual counties, we've got to check on an individual county level.
Let's see. How soon after auction for Illinois are results posted? That is a good question. I'm not sure how long it takes them before they actually post their results here from some of the auctions they've done, but they have had quite a few auctions here just recently in
Usually it's a
Illinois.
couple weeks.
Yeah, so some of these, maybe coming up here, we could probably find out. Those are all the ones coming up here. We need to go to the ones that are past here.
You'd almost have to kind of know what the date was and then go back and look at the individual county.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't think they have a past sale there. So if we knew one of the counties had their auction last month, then we could go look at that county. If you go to the home page, we could pick that Illinois county. So let's say it was, Alexander County or whatever it is, one of these counties. You could go ahead and look at it and then see when it happened, and they'll provide us with the
the
results.
results. Yeah, so we could, normally we'd be able to click on that auction there, for that county, and then when we go look at the results, they'll have the most recent sale listed, down there, and so we can click on that most recent sale and then see the results, like this. That's what you'll need to do there with some of those counties there. And yeah, they usually do have them listed there within a couple of weeks after
Well,
the
and
sale.
talking about over the counter, this is an area. See all of those properties that are available? Those are properties that can be picked up for around $850. So if we are talking about buying over the counter tax deeds, Illinois is a great state to look at because essentially they'll be about under $900 to purchase the over the counter deed. And if it's a good property, then it could definitely be worth, picking on or picking up and bidding on and winning.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, yeah, we can see we have these mobile homes from this point, I think.
Yeah, those are mobile homes.
Yeah, there are mobile homes there. And yeah, we could do the same thing here with any of the counties. So any of these that are holding sales or that will be holding sales, we can track here, and you can see when they did their last sale, and when the results pull up. But usually it is within within a few weeks. So for instance, Will County is about to do their sale. We can see they have their sale listed there from 10/18 of last year. They're doing their sale around the same time this year. And so that will be up here pretty soon. But you could basically click on this, and within a couple of weeks here, it should be available, and you should be able to see the results here of the 10/25 sale and what's still available.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's see. Land perk tests, etc. What's needed? What town needs to be able to show potential investors it's a good building lot? Oh, so it's a good question. We don't usually, so I guess when it comes to things like a perk test, it's usually a step that builders are going to go through, the property owner will go through before they do construction on their property. But it's not necessarily a test that we do often unless we're trying to develop the lot ourselves. We usually will allow that for the property owner. And normally perk tests are not a problem with most lots, unless you have a lot that's really wet or has standing water or something, and then you could have an issue there with water, just like you could with any lot if there's water issues there with it. But yeah, we don't normally do the perk test. Normally what we'll do to check for usability is we're just checking the zoning requirements. So whatever it is that the zoning has listed as a mandated requirement for that zoning district or for that zoning qualification or classification. So residential 1, if it's R1 residential, there should be a square footage requirement. And there may be something like a width requirement or depth requirement, whatever it is. That's usually what we're basing our decision to buy on. And then when we turn around and sell, what we're usually including in that is just our knowledge that the property is usable. And so we might include, the information there about what the requirements are for use in terms of, how many square feet does it need to be? It's this many square feet, which it reaches, for usability. We might list some of that information in our ad itself to let the buyer know as they're reading through it that it's a good usable property, and here's why.
Yeah, another thing to consider is that perk tests really have to do with building or installing a septic system. And so, that's the reason why you need a perk test in those kind of situations, is because they're going to be putting a septic system in the ground. So if we're looking at a lot of our building lots are in town limits, well, that means they're going to be able to be connected to the town sewer system. And if that's the case, we don't need a septic tank. So really, perk tests are going to be involved in more rural counties. And like Shay said, we're usually just going to sell it and let the buyer decide to do that. But if we were looking to get a higher price, maybe we're going through quiet title, we wanted to try to get our very best price on the property, and it's a more rural property that requires a septic system, that may be the one time that we would go ahead and have a perk test done. But if it's in the middle of town, it doesn't make any sense. You don't need it because they're not going to be doing a septic system.
Yeah. When wholesaling properties, after how many days do you start to think about changing your price or marketing strategy? So, we may consider changing up our pricing and stuff after, I don't know. I mean, I guess after a month or so, a month or two, we may start to think about other things that we do. We don't really panic though with properties. I mean, because we're pretty well planning on it, we plan on it taking a year to sell properties. So if we get interest, we can get them to sell for less. Then, that's always a good bonus. And so I don't know if
I would say if you're not getting a lot of traction every 60 to 90 days, it could be worth evaluating it. Maybe you need to add more pictures. Maybe you need to change the way that your ad is listed. Maybe you do need to drop the price. In fact, one thing that was interesting is I was working with my dad and my uncle years ago, helping them market some of their properties that they were selling. And, we had lots where he just kept dropping the price and he wasn't getting any action on it. So he had me start increasing the price. And I started increasing the price back up to what we had it by $5,000 each week. And suddenly he had a rush of buyers that had been looking at the actual lots or looking at these properties and interested in them. But now as they're starting to jump up in price, that actually created urgency and they were able to sell these lots. I couldn't believe it. I didn't believe, are you sure you want me to do this? You want me to, yeah, just keep, every single month, every single week as we relist it, let's bring up the price. And it ended up selling all those properties because it did create a sense of urgency. So it's important to look at those ads, see who you're marketing to, and make sure that we use all of the free services that are available. Because as I said before, it's going to put them in front of different people's eyes. Different people are looking at Facebook than are looking at Craigslist. And there's probably different people looking at Zillow that are looking at Craigslist or Facebook. So, by using those different resources, we're at least getting it out to as many people as possible.
Yeah, let's see, great questions here. If you have a real estate license in another state and you buy a property or you put a property on the MLS in Illinois, should you disclose your real estate license?
That one I'm going to have to look up. It's been 20 plus years since I was a real estate agent. So I'd probably have to Google that one and find out for sure.
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know how applicable it is or exactly when it is that you're supposed to disclose versus not disclose. That is a good question.
Yeah, I could see it either way. I could see that it doesn't make a difference out of state, and maybe it does. Would probably have to do a little bit more research into answering that one.
Yeah, and yeah, we'll definitely have a replay out for everybody to view. So yeah, if you were just able to get on late, then yeah, we'll have a replay out so that you can review that and get the parts that you missed.
Absolutely. Well, if we're not able to answer all your questions, if you have additional questions, go ahead and sign up for the strategy call. You can talk to one of our trainers. They can help answer any of those additional questions that you may have.
Yeah, and on the credit card question there, Grace, I'm not sure, other than going to individual sites to check, we kind of have to do the same thing right now because it's changing with each one. So, but if it's an online auction, you definitely have a much higher chance of them accepting credit cards because it's usually the online auctions that are doing it. So that's one of the things we look at is, with the online auctions. From there though, it's from auction provider to auction provider. And so, we're not usually going to know unless we look there in their auction terms. And even then, sometimes we have to dig into it a little bit to figure out, within their terms that they'll accept, the credit cards and you can pay with them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that is everything. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining us here for this. And we look forward to doing it again here soon. And yeah, like Steve said, if we didn't get to your questions, feel free to send those in. We'd love to get to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, everyone. We appreciate you.
See you later.